John F. Kennedy occupies a singular place in American history, a young, magnetic president cut down before his time, forever frozen in the amber of Camelot mythology. But behind the polished image of the devoted husband and father lay a private life of remarkable complexity. Historians, biographers, and investigative journalists have spent decades piecing together the full picture of Kennedy's romantic entanglements, and what emerges is a portrait far more complicated than the official narrative ever suggested. His affairs were not merely tabloid fodder. They intersected with organized crime, Hollywood royalty, Cold War politics, and the inner workings of the White House itself. This is the documented story of the women John F. Kennedy is believed to have had affairs with, drawn from memoirs, biographies, declassified records, and first-hand accounts. Before examining individual relationships, it is worth understanding the environment that allowed Kennedy's personal life to remain largely hidden during his lifetime. American political journalism in the late 1950s and early 1960s operated under an unwritten gentleman's agreement. The private lives of public figures, particularly presidents, were considered off-limits. Kennedy was deeply aware of this norm and cultivated close friendships with influential members of the press corps. He was charming, intellectually generous, and socially disarming with journalists. That combination created an informal shield around his private conduct that would be utterly unimaginable in the modern media landscape. It was only after his assassination in November 1963, and particularly from the late 1970s onward, that the full scope of his extramarital life began to emerge through memoirs, investigative books, and declassified government documents. Perhaps no figure in Kennedy's romantic history carried more geopolitical weight than Judith Campbell Exner, a socially connected and strikingly attractive woman. Exner was introduced to Kennedy in 1960 through singer Frank Sinatra. What followed was a 2-year affair that ran directly through some of the most sensitive corridors of American power. The reason Exner's relationship with Kennedy became a matter of serious national security concern was that she was simultaneously involved with Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana, the same organized crime figure the CIA had reportedly approached about assassinating Fidel Castro. Exner went public with her story in her 1977 memoir, My Story, and elaborated further in a 1988 interview with People magazine, in which she claimed she had become pregnant with Kennedy's child and subsequently had an abortion. She described Kennedy in personal terms as attentive, considerate, and emotionally engaged, a portrayal that stood in sharp contrast to some later accounts. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover was aware of the relationship and used knowledge of it as leverage. Senate investigations in the 1970s confirmed that Exner had been in phone contact with both Kennedy and Giancana during overlapping periods. She passed away from breast cancer in 1999 at the age of 65, but her story remains one of the most consequential threads in the broader Kennedy narrative. Mary Pinchot Meyer. Mary Pinchot Meyer was no ordinary Washington socialite. Educated, intellectually sophisticated, and deeply connected to the capital's elite circles, she moved through a world of artists, diplomats, and power brokers with remarkable ease. She was also the sister-in-law of Washington Post editor Ben Bradley, which made the revelation of her affair with Kennedy particularly resonant within journalism circles. According to multiple biographers, Kennedy and Meyer carried on an affair that lasted from around 1961 until his death in 1963. A letter from Kennedy to Meyer, which resurfaced at auction decades later, revealed a man who was emotionally invested in the relationship, urging her to visit him, expressing frustration at her reluctance, and writing with a kind of personal longing rarely associated with Kennedy's public persona. The letter's contents suggested this was not a casual or purely physical liaison, but something with genuine emotional texture. What gives Meyer's story its most haunting dimension is what happened next. Less than a year after Kennedy's assassination, in October 1964, Mary Pinchot Meyer was shot and killed while walking along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath in Georgetown. The murder was never solved. A man was arrested and tried but acquitted. Her diary, which she had asked a friend to retrieve after her death, was reportedly found and burned by her brother-in-law. The circumstances surrounding her death have fueled speculation for decades, though no definitive conclusions have ever been established. Mimi Alfred. Of all the accounts that emerged in the years following Kennedy's death, perhaps none was more personal or more carefully told than that of Mimi Alford, a 19-year-old college student and White House intern when she first encountered Kennedy in 1962. Alford detailed her 18-month relationship with the president in her 2012 memoir, Once Upon a Secret: My Affair with President John F. Kennedy and Its Aftermath. Alford's account is distinguished by its intimacy and emotional honesty. She describes being invited for drinks and a private tour of the White House shortly after beginning her internship, and the encounter escalating in a way she had not anticipated. She was young, new to Washington, and entirely unprepared for the attention of the most powerful man in the world. Their relationship continued throughout much of 1962 and into 1963, conducted largely within the White House itself. Alford has been consistently candid about the complicated feelings she carried for decades, the excitement of the relationship at the time, and the weight it placed on her in the years that followed. Her memoir is considered one of the more credible and carefully documented first-person accounts in the Kennedy literature, and it drew significant attention upon publication for the sober and reflective tone in which she approached an inherently difficult subject. The inclusion of Pamela Turnure in the Kennedy story carries its own layer of irony. Turnure, a young woman of considerable poise and physical elegance, was said by several biographers to bear a striking resemblance to Jacqueline Kennedy. According to Larry J. Sabato's extensively researched book The Kennedy Half-Century, Kennedy carried on an affair with Turnure that began around 1961, when she was 21 years old. What makes Turnure's situation particularly remarkable is the professional arrangement that surrounded the alleged relationship. Kennedy is believed to have personally advocated for Turnure to be appointed as Jacqueline Kennedy's press secretary, a position that would have placed her in daily proximity to both the president and the First Lady. Whether this reflected Kennedy's characteristic boldness, his disregard for consequences, or something more psychologically complex is a matter of interpretation. Turnure herself never publicly confirmed the relationship, and she remained a private figure throughout her life, known within the Kennedy White House by the memorable nicknames Fiddle and Faddle. Priscilla Ware and Jill Cowan were secretaries who became subjects of persistent speculation about their relationships with the president. The nicknames themselves, playful, diminutive, slightly conspiratorial, speak to the informal and insular atmosphere that apparently characterized Kennedy's inner circle. The most striking detail involving Priscilla came from Kennedy aide Barbara Gamarikian, who recounted that Jackie Kennedy, in conversation with a Paris Match reporter conducted in French, pointed toward Ware and remarked that she was the woman sleeping with her husband. Whether the comment was made in bitterness, resignation, or dry gallows humor is impossible to know, but it suggests that Jackie Kennedy was far more aware of the dynamics around her than the official narrative acknowledged. Jill Cowan, for her part, never publicly discussed any personal relationship with Kennedy, though she did offer reflections on his deep pride in Jackie's meticulous attention to the details of White House domestic life. Swedish socialite Gunilla von Post represents one of the earlier chapters in Kennedy's romantic biography. In her memoir Love, Jack, von Post described meeting a 36-year-old Kennedy on the French Riviera in 1953, when she was 21. By her account, the encounter was immediately charged: a moonlit setting, a sudden kiss, and the beginning of a correspondence and connection that would continue for several years. The timing of their initial meeting is significant. Kennedy was weeks away from marrying Jacqueline Bouvier. Von Post's memoir suggests that Kennedy, even at that pre-presidential stage, was already conflicted about the path his life was taking. She claims that when they met again 2 years later, Kennedy spoke of contemplating divorce from Jackie. His father, Joseph Kennedy Sr., apparently counseled strongly against it on the grounds of political practicality, and Kennedy ultimately chose the marriage and the career over the relationship. Von Post's account, while disputed in some quarters, offers a window into Kennedy's interior life during a formative period. Leigh Starr was one of the most celebrated exotic performers in America during the 1950s, headlining clubs across the mid-Atlantic states and cultivating a reputation for charisma and showmanship that transcended her profession. In a 1989 interview with People magazine, Starr revealed that she and Kennedy had a brief affair in 1954, when he was a congressman and a regular visitor to her Maryland club. Starr's description of Kennedy was characteristically colorful, confident, quick-witted, and completely at ease with himself. She noted that his well-documented back problems, which would become a significant medical burden throughout his presidency, did not appear to affect him in private. Their affair was brief, and Starr noted that plans for a reunion during the Cuban Missile Crisis, of all moments, fell through due to the demands of the crisis itself. The juxtaposition of personal rendezvous and one of the most dangerous geopolitical confrontations in modern history is, in its own way, emblematic of the contradictions that define Kennedy's life. Marlene Dietrich was already a legend by the time she allegedly crossed paths with Kennedy in September 1963. The German-born actress and cabaret performer, then 60 years old and performing a one-woman show in Washington, D.C., is said to have been invited to the White House for drinks with the president. What followed, according to diary entries by theater critic Kenneth Tynan that were later submitted to The New Yorker, was a brief and somewhat comedic encounter. Kennedy making his intentions clear, Dietrich noting she had a commitment to honor, and the entire episode resolving itself in under 30 minutes before she departed for an evening ceremony. Dietrich's daughter Maria Riva included reference to the encounter in her biographical writings about her mother. The anecdote has a quality of mutual amusement about it, two enormously famous people navigating a fleeting moment with awareness of the clock and a certain mutual recognition of the absurdity of the situation. It stands apart from Kennedy's other alleged affairs primarily in its brevity and its slightly farcical texture. Actress Angie Dickinson was introduced to Kennedy through Frank Sinatra at a pre-convention party hosted by Kennedy's sister in Santa Monica in 1960. The precise nature and duration of their relationship has always been subject to considerable ambiguity. Dickinson herself was notably coy in interviews over the decades, neither fully confirming nor categorically denying a romantic connection. What has been written about their alleged relationship includes an account in journalist Jed Mercurio's work, where Dickinson reportedly offered frank assessments of Kennedy's qualities as a lover. The relationship, to the extent it existed, appears to have been brief and rooted in the celebrity political social world that Sinatra presided over during that era. Dickinson remained a graceful and somewhat enigmatic presence in the Kennedy story, never fully stepping into the spotlight that other women occupied. No name is more persistently linked to John F. Kennedy's private life than Marilyn Monroe, and yet the historical record suggests that the reality of their connection was considerably more limited than popular mythology implies. What is beyond dispute is the performance. On May 19, 1962, Monroe appeared at Madison Square Garden for Kennedy's birthday fundraiser and sang Happy Birthday, Mr. President in a breathless, intimate style that became one of the defining cultural images of the era. Serious Kennedy biographers, including historian Donald Spoto in his 1993 work Marilyn Monroe, the biography, have argued that documented opportunities for a sustained affair were remarkably few. The most credible account places both Kennedy and Monroe at Bing Crosby's Palm Springs home in March 1962, a gathering corroborated by Monroe's friend and masser Ralph Roberts, who recalled hearing what he believed was Kennedy's voice during a phone conversation with Monroe that weekend. Actress Susan Strasberg, a close friend of Monroe, also referenced Monroe's awareness that Kennedy was not the man she imagined building a life with, suggesting a degree of emotional clarity on Monroe's part that complicates the romantic narrative. Monroe died of a barbiturate overdose on August 5, 1962, at 36 years old. Kennedy was assassinated 15 months later. Whatever the precise nature of their connection, both figures were dead within 2 years of that extraordinary birthday performance, and the mythology that surrounds them has only deepened with time. What emerges from examining Kennedy's private life in full is not simply a catalog of infidelities, but a portrait of a man living in profound contradiction, publicly devoted to family, faith, and national purpose, and privately conducting a personal life of extraordinary recklessness. The women in his life ranged from teenagers to international icons, from White House staff to Hollywood legends. Some left detailed accounts. Others maintained silence until their deaths. History has treated Kennedy with a complexity his personal conduct perhaps demands. He remains one of the most admired presidents in American polling, even as the full picture of his private behavior has become widely known. That tension between the public man and the private one is perhaps the most enduring mystery at the center of the Kennedy story.